Pan-African Parliament is very important because we discuss issues which affect Africa in general, and then we try to come up with global solutions which will have wide application. And when we're discussing corruption, it's very important, on the one hand, to share our experience and find out what are the weaknesses. But more importantly, on the other hand, is to come up with solution that works. And in order to fight corruption, we need to have this global cooperation among all African countries, because there are illicit flow of funds in Africa, and certain experts even think that there's more money going out of Africa than coming into Africa, and one of the reasons is corruptions. So we are here to share our experience and then come up with a resolution, and then more importantly, implement it and have a flow-up.
Right, because one would argue and say that dealing with corruption at a global level, as far as the African level, the Pan-African Parliament level, would be difficult, and so everybody would say we have our own unique context back in our own unique countries. So how then does the Pan-African Parliament, or the members of the Pan-African Parliament, work around dealing with corruption from a Pan-African level? How practical, how viable is that?
I think that corruption is one of these things which it doesn't matter which country you're from. It is the same thing. It is people trying to enrich themselves through illicit means, through illegal means. So I don't know of any African country which allow and authorize and permit corruption. So at least this is the unifying factor. Everybody knows that the corruption is the main disease affecting Africa and preventing Africa from growing and developing. Because on the one hand, you're not able to optimize your resources because people who don't deserve it are getting the contract. But on the other hand, because of this negative perception of corruption, investors are not interested because they don't want to come and invest if tomorrow someone else will come in and benefit. So I think it is something that affects all Africans in common, and I'm sure we have a session in the afternoon. We have two sessions actually in the afternoon dealing specifically with corruption, and we are very much looking forward to the recommendations.
Right, and for those who are watching would be just thinking that they're just going to talk. And then after they will just leave, and then it's business as usual. They do not have legislative powers. This is the Pan-African parliamentary members. And so how then are they going to actually actualize whatever they talk about in their sessions?
True. This is an absolutely fair comment. And there has been the Malapo Convention where we have head of states of the many African Union countries have decided to give Pan-African Parliament legislative powers, but up to now only 10, and I have to confess, Mauritius is not one of the 10 who has ratified the Pan-African, this new protocol to give legislative powers to Pan-African Parliament. But I'm one of the people who believe that even if you don't have direct legislative powers, you can still come up with model law and then encourage your member state to implement those laws and do a follow-up and find out if they have not implemented them, why they have not implemented them. Yeah. Because I believe African values is not about confrontation, it's about talking, sitting around and trying to find a solution. If something is not working, then as brothers and sisters of the African Union, we have to sit and have the courage to speak it and with one voice come to a solution.
Right. I mean, if you look at also some of the reports that have been coming out as far as corruption perception index is concerned, Transparency International saying that globally, out of the top 20 countries that are corrupt, out of them, 12 are from Africa. And most of the time we've seen Africa being painted as that country with corruption. And do you think, looking at those numbers, do you think that that is an unfair way of thinking of Africa?
I think it's very unfair because I think Africa, we've been putting a lot of efforts in, especially in the recent years, to try to get our house in order. But coming to specifically to Transparency International, I think it's very unfair that they blame only the African countries for being corrupt. In an act of corruption, you have someone who receives, but you have also someone who gives. So I would encourage Transparency International to come up with a list of countries who corrupt African, name them, shame them, because if money, illicit money, is coming into Africa for corruption, there must be someone, paying bribes to get the contract. So I'd be very interested to know where these company who pays bribe come from which countries, and then, we can take these countries also to task.
And from taking them to task, or probably how practical or in what ways would you be taking them to task if they were to be named?
Well, of course there will be sanctions, because it is an illegal act in their own country to pay bribe to corrupt foreign officials.
Yeah.
So, first of all, the developed countries, those who are engaged in these corruption, they'll have to do their own mea culpa and, come and, if ever there has been any illicit flow routed through their countries, then they have to give back that money to Africa.
Right. Talking of giving back, let's now talk a bit about Mauritius, your beautiful country. It's been touted as one of those countries that have actually been fighting corruption, coming in at around number 54, out of, I think, 175 countries gauged by Transparency International. But one of the challenges, or one of the things that are being talked about when it comes to Mauritius, is that country being one of the places where is a tax haven. Where people take their money, the offshore money laundering and all that. How much of an issue or of a concern is this for you as a member of parliament, especially from the opposition? and what is Mauritius doing to deal with this, to save its image?
I think this is one aspect in Mauritius, which have made the news recently. But let me say this, Eugene. From day one, Mauritius, we've always wanted to be a clean jurisdiction, a clean financial center. We never wanted to be among the tax haven. And from day one, we've been legislating and having the proper laws in place and the proper checks and balances. Whenever there was any complaint from the OECD, from the Europeans, we addressed those issues. We passed anti-money laundering legislation. We passed exchange of information for tax collection, and we passed laws for mutual assistance in criminal matters. But yes, there are times when there are some bad apples and some who fall through the cracks. But in Mauritius, what we do is we'll go even further and try to minimize the risk of money laundering. But as I said, bottom line is Mauritius is transparent and cooperative. So if there is any allegation of any corruption happening in Africa and any money from illicit funds being routed through Mauritius, Mauritius will not hesitate to freeze those accounts and return back the money to their lawful owner.